So what CAU2 acknowledges on society, open government, is that although we live in a society where continuous discrimination is trying to go away in legislation, in a democratic society, we do not see that those kinds of trends are actually applying within the religious institutions. We believe that the kind of discrimination that is being occurred within these religious institutions, such as women not being able to become priests, such as in the Muslim field, where these individuals are actually directly discriminated regardless of what kind of abilities that they actually have. This kind of vague, arbitrary discrimination we will never tolerate on CAU2, therefore we proudly propose today's motion. Our policy is going to be very simple. We give a lot of arbitrary benefits towards these religious institutions because we are based on the assumption that they will do good for that society, such as we exempt them from a lot of tax, such as we allow them to be exempted from a lot of the legislation that we see within today's society. We will not accept that we are going to destroy those like legislation exemptions based upon the kind of discrimination that we see based upon the social norms within the democratic society or whatever society within that field. We are not going to allow that to happen. I'm going to talk about it on 3 levels. First of all, I'm going to talk to you about why religious institutions should not be an exemption towards equal opportunity. Our second argument is going to talk to you about why it has to be specifically government intervention and why the government is the only institution to intervene. Third of all, I'm going to talk to you about the overall social harms, about why it should continue and why it should not continue on that way. Let's go into the first argument about why religious institutions. Because we very strongly analyze about the characteristics of religion. It is that it is based upon a belief of an individual. But that belief cannot be counter-checked or cannot be ratified because it is based upon a creator of the high gods. Therefore, these individual people within that society, the kind of human beings that are believing within that belief, cannot actually ratify or actually see whether that is true or not. Therefore, they have no other choice but to believe in that belief. They have no other choice but to believe and just assume that it is right within the society. We strongly believe that on that basis, this creates a lot of disbenefits towards the people who get directly discriminated by those individuals because they have no other check and balance within that religious institution to see whether if this is right or wrong. Secondly, we strongly believe that this kind of interpretation based upon names such as the Bible or the Quran are based upon people of upper, higher ground. They have a higher opportunity or a higher institution to directly dictate these individuals, to dictate the kind of beliefs that these individuals are actually having within the status quo. So on that basis, we strongly believe that there are 2 main characteristics of religion that is very, very disbenefiting towards these individuals that are being discriminated. So let's go into the analysis about why it has to be government intervention. Because we clearly told you that this is a divine belief. This is a belief that cannot be interpreted by the kind of legislation we see within status quo. However, once people actually interpret religion based upon the beliefs of a gender or race, this is very, very arbitrary. Why? Because these kinds of beliefs, these kinds of ideas within a society have to be based upon the abilities, have to be based upon whether you actually have this kind of faith towards those individuals. However, just because that person is the woman, just because that person is the kind of perspective or the kind of target within discrimination itself, that does not directly mean that that person has the less capability to actually do much more better or actually show their faith within that society itself. Yes, sir?
To make something into law in legislation, you have to base on the very objectiveness. However, those kind of things are open to interpretation because the objective is important.
It is very obvious and it is very objective when you say that a woman cannot be a priest just because of the fact that she's a female. That is very objective and that can be applied within the law. We see it every day, so just learn. Let's go into the second analysis about why it is unfair. As we have already told you, this cannot be checked or this cannot be balanced within the society. And I've already told you that this is based upon the interpretation of the higher people. The people who say that they have more understanding of the Bible. The people who say that they have actually reached out to God and God told them to become a priest. We believe on that basis there's no way to actually go against that. But on the third level, we strongly believe that they cannot go against a community. These individuals who are being discriminated cannot go against a community that's actually formed within that society, that is formed within that church itself. Because religion is very based upon the community of believers. They actually create groups and they actually say that they actually believe these individuals. So on that basis, we strongly believe that just because one individual actually comes out of the church, one person actually goes to a legislative, that person does not have the capacity to go against millions of people who actually believe it worldwide. So on that basis, we strongly believe that these individuals do not have the capacity to go against the entire government or the entire religious institution themselves. Therefore, because these individuals do not have the capacity to go against the discrimination that we see within the society, it has to be the government. It has to be the government who has the capacity and the power to go for legislation, to actually create these kinds of laws so that people within that society can abide to. Although these priests might be religious leaders themselves, they are also people living within the society. There are also people that cannot go against the laws within that society itself. This is something of very good characteristic that we see within the legislative, and that is why we are trying to make a law. That is exactly the main reason why law is abided by every single person, regardless of status, regardless of one person, that the one mental state. That is, if you have committed an action that goes against the social norms, you will be punished, and that is something that CAU2 is going to do for direct discrimination within that society. Let's go to the third issue about harms, about what happens when we continuously allow the society to continuously go on. As I already told you, the religions themselves, they create a community. They are based upon social acts and religion, and just because that social act goes against that religion, that does not mean that the religion is false itself. Therefore, it is based upon a fundamental community of beliefs within that institution themselves. We strongly believe that this community also goes back into society. They are not only like sitting in the church and just believing and praying to God. They are also members of the society itself. However, we strongly believe that once this kind of social beliefs within that church institution actually create a lot of social norms between themselves, this also reflects the kind of social action that we see once you actually come out of that society. Why is that? Because once you actually have a lot of people believing for a fact that these women cannot become priests, these women do not have the capacity to actually show their own abilities, that creates a social norm within the entire society itself. Social acts and religious acts cannot be divided. At the end of the day. Therefore, we strongly believe that those kind of social norms as created by the churches, created by the religious beliefs that have a lot of people and have a lot of community will also affect the society once they actually come out. They will also think that people, when a person is applying maybe for a job, they'll actually think that this person might be inferior to another person within the society itself. It creates a social gender and a social discrimination against that individual, whoever is basically perspective to that kind of discrimination. Therefore, this affects the society as a very people acting within the society, regardless of whether that person is religious, because now you are creating a social norm. Now people who are not even religious will now start to believe that this person might be inferior. This person is like a lower level within that society itself. Therefore, because we strongly believe that the kind of religious institution creating those actions, creating those social norms, actually affect the people outside who are not even religious, this actually goes for discrimination. We are proud of it.
We take this speaker for stage. We now invite the leader of the opposition to open the opening up.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you, members of the panel. Well, first of all, we believe that when a legislation is passed, it's not a small thing to see. For such a large thing to be passed, we have to see that there are certain clear standards, there are clear problems that we can analyze before we actually melt within a certain society to actually act upon a legislation at that large a scale, see before, and which also can carry the potential of many other harms. That is the stance which team opposition is bringing upon to the podium as we are going to speak with you. So, as the leader of opposition, we'll talk about the legitimacy of the legislation itself, and the deputy leader of opposition will talk about the unexpected harms and the wrong reflections regarding society itself. But before I go on to any constructives, please let me point out some mistakes made by the Prime Minister. Well, first of all, his argument was mainly talking about the clear case of certain people not being able to share some rules within the religious society. But the thing is, the religious society as they have already as they have already conceded to, it has certain beliefs, and people are also controlled, also act upon those beliefs as well, as we can clearly see. So they have a religious interpretation regarding their subjective values of what is equal and what is not. And the government, which the characteristic of legislation absolutely is making the standard of an entire society of what is right or wrong. They cannot decide that without clear differentiations, they enter the legislation and actually jeopardize the value of religion itself. So therefore, the legislation interpretation can also lead on to the confusion, because without any clear harms that we have analyzed, it could also bring upon many other problems many other problems as well. Also, he also said that the people within the religious organizations lack the capacity to actually change the situations that are being made. But we now believe that that is a totally different case. religious organizations are the people that have the most influence over the people within their organizations. So if they see a problem with it, if they see a clear detrimental problem within their religious organizations, they can see to it and actually fix the problems regarding themselves because they analyze it and see it as a problem. And they do a better job than the government because they do it on the perspective of their religious values and they do not harm the sacredness of the religion itself, which is therefore preserving its diversity in turn. So mainly, their whole argument was that their religion is causing a problem, but they haven't actually analyzed the clear problem that we can see, and without proper analysis, it's going to cause even bigger problems without actually proving a solvency. And they have also proven out lesser capacities, but we believe that it's the exact opposite. The people at the top of the religious organizations are the ones with the exact capacity, and yes, sir.
When society progresses and evolves their own social norms, so do religious norms themselves, such as what happened within the Old Testament evolving into the New Testament.
Yes, sir. Religions, of course, centuries ago, stoning was allowed, burning witches was allowed, but are they allowed today? No, sirree. Religions also evolve with social norms. If they see a detrimental, clear problem, the society recognizes it and it is fixed. That is the situation we are seeing in the very status quo. And now please let me proceed onto my constructives. Now, my argument will be made in 3 levels of analysis. First of all, what is the legislation exactly? The characterization of legislation, the characterization of religion, and the linkage to why it is a wrong social consensus and why we are opposing this notion in the very first place. Now, the first level of analysis. What is legislation? You see, legislation is, well, in terms of law, it's a minimum moral standard that every single person within the society abides by and secures. No one is exempted from that. Everybody abides by the rules if it is made by law. So they follow those standards. And we can safely say that since everybody abides by it and the government actually punishes people who do not follow those legislations, it is a simple saying. They are deciding what is right and what is wrong. So when we decide when something can actually be brandished as right and wrong, what must we have? We must have clear, objective, lucid standards that we can analyze in the very first place before we actually bring upon subjective values into these places and brandish something wrongly as right or wrongly wrong. And thank you, sirs. So that is the characteristic of the legislation. For it to be legit, we have to see clear standards and social detrimental aspects. Now, the second level analysis, the status quo of religion. You see, as I just answered in the POI, many religious organizations, they had many religions, many radical values. There's no denying that. They went aggressive at certain times, stoning, burning, as I just said. There were aggressive actions, but those actions, the society analyzed them as illegit because they have actually tampered with the individual's right to life and the individual's perspective in the very first place. So those problems have been analyzed and they have been brandished as wrong because they are a clear harm regarding the aspect in these examples of killing people. So this problem has been seen and the problems have been fixed. So what are religious organizations in the current status quo, Madam Speaker? The religious organizations in the current status quo, as we can see, are religious organizations that have centuries, maybe millenniums old, that have many old values that stem down from certain core beliefs. And those core beliefs have been changed for the better way regarding to some social norms as I have proven to you. So basically we can see that the organizations we are analyzing today are religious organizations that act upon the basis of their certain beliefs and actually practice those beliefs on what they know is right without harming social norms and on the basis of what they think is right according to their beliefs. Now that leads on to my third level of analysis. Now, how does this bring upon our social consensus? Now, what the government team is actually trying to do is pass a legislation, as I proved to you in my first level analysis, something so big that it needs a lot of conditions, without matching the most important condition, objective standards. They are imposing this without certain analysis of an objective standard, and is bringing upon and is interfering with the religious organizations which have actually abided to certain social norms, actually fixed their stance towards the better of the society. What we are seeing here is, if this motion is passed, they are bringing upon uncertain changes which could trickle down and lead into other detrimental harms that actually breach upon the sacred values and individual beliefs of a religious organization. The government, if they are to decide what value is wrong, they have to see what is generally acceptable truth. But they are only acting upon certain subjective beliefs. But this is not the case. We should actually implement it in the very first thing. Religious interpretation has many subjective values, and for those things to be actually considered detrimental, we need objectiveness. So, all in all, having a very wobbly legislation that does not have any legitimate standards, which could also lead to detrimental harms in today's society. So, we are very proud to propose. Thank you.
We thank the Speaker for his speech. We now invite the Deputy Prime Minister to close the opening government.
Madam Chair, from the speech of the leader of opposition, they didn't answer the fundamental question we want to ask. So why this religious institution are excused at the first moment in terms of whole issue at the first? We believe this is the problem. We recognize the fact that this separation between state and church still exists. The problem is only because of the religious reason. It's not justifiable. So go against the human fundamental right, which is everyone having the same equality at the first moment. We no longer see this covering this anymore. So these religious institutions should be also included as one of the social members. We see a lot of situations happen. Even if your sexual preference cannot be actually the reason to discriminate it, to go in a certain way, to action as you based on the freedom of choices. So their second speaker should come up and say, I really expect it. So why this one is actually excused as a third? If they didn't prove the whole opposition tension would be in trouble.
Here.
So in my speech, I'm a couple of the rebuttal from the zero opposition speech. I'm moving on to my rest of argumentation. So why the government should do and why this government should do bring more benefit to the religious institution at the moment. So firstly, about how this society changed. We believe if these religious institutions having enough check and balances, we don't care. The thing is, these institutions, because only believe they are the belief, it's not about based on the rational thinking. It's more about based on their inheritance. But thing is, even though having an inheritance in certain groups, we having two different inheritance methods. First is a tradition, second is a convention. But we believe the tradition we never touch upon the issue about this. But about the convention, because the only reason because they're believing in God. They're going against a certain trend what these people and these societies want to achieve. We don't want to recognize any of these facts. This convention cannot be solved by the religious institutions themselves. Who's going to be solving this problem? We think it's the government. Government can be an institution because their bills, because the legislation is actually go overcome the whole cultural basis what this society having. We can apply for every single person, no matter what kind of economic status you have, no matter what kind of current schemes you have, no matter what kind of belief you have. This one under the law because everybody should be having the equality at the first moment. These guys fail and current status quo as well. That's why we should bring a change about the room for these institutions changing themselves as a third entity, check and balances done by the government.
Sir,
Yes.
just as corporations have the right to choose their CEOs, religious institutions have every right to choose based on their belief system and based on their value.
Okay, the simple question is that why these women have so devoted, so no understanding about the Bible, and know better than any other person, but only because they are women. Why this criteria cannot be accepting her as a priest, Madam Speaker? We believe these situations is called discrimination, and also the religious reason it cannot be just justified as called as their sovereignty. That's why second my rebuttal is about the sovereignty. Yes, sovereignty is important, but we never say the state is going to overcome these four churches. They always having their own values and own system at the first moment. But because their systems more than other people, if we harm the others, government never neglecting at the first moment can step in. We call this as affirmative action. So in my these rebuttal moving on to my argumentation. So why the government should do? We think the government is still having enough check and balances. These people can look over the government. People can actually check and balances this government at the first. And that's why individual having a vote. This vote is not about based on your skin color, based on your economical status. It's based on your trust and your actually having these situations. And also the media exists. So that's why even though government trying to do about the check and balances these church institutions, still government can be acting as a legal and rational choices, Madam Speaker. Because the government, because the government bill we already talked to is more about, it's not based as a cultural, it's not care about the cultural ground, it's more about based on the human, right, Madam Speaker? Why this is happening? Because even though you're having a cultural differences, you have this government can be said, your cultural differences going directly against the society's social norm, then can be penalized, we can be limited for what you actually have. That's the situation we can expanding in this situation for maintaining and supporting our policy. So how we can bring up benefit? We think a lot of changes, social changes, is also done by the government. Because even the society, even the religious believe that way. We think this fundamental human right never can be changed by themselves, Madam Speaker. That's why the government passed the bill trying to implementing a situation. So, example, so-called affirmative action. Yes, certain religious do. Even though you are a Buddhist monk, they never actually criticize whether you actually background, your actually skin colors. We think this example is not only for this one religious. Every religious, even though having a different belief and different belief in God, this fundamental human right can be changing by the government. So why the benefit? It's more about that their belief is based on equality at the first place. Jesus never said you can be discriminated. And even Allah never said you are because Muslim, not Muslim, we have to differentiate. What the concept of the whole religious is equality at the first place. What they're showing this is not about equality. That's why even though you have school, you have a really devote, you love this culture, you cannot be as one of the actor that is people. So if we change this motion, religiously seeing the woman's priest and seeing any others, these people are believing these religions bring more fairness at the first place. So it's trusting, increasing trusting, people more supporting this religion more and ever. These religions more closely related to the society with equality. We think it's a benefit. Only government can bring this situation to benefit. What we're talking about, Madam Speaker, on the case, we want equality, human right can be never say ever about any exception about we actually achieving this social equality. For this reason, motion should be extended. Thank you.
Thank you, Speaker. We now invite the Deputy Leader of the Opposition to close the upper house.
You're here.
Madam Speaker, Mr. Speaker, and ladies and gentlemen, yes, Jesus and Allah never said that women should not be oppressed. The thing is, they also never said that women can become oppressed. So we think that interpretation is the problem. The religious interpretation, that if you make the interpretation that men are the suitable people to become the priest, then we think that we should respect the interpretation. Just because of their subjective value, we can just intervene into this religion. We don't think that we can make a law into banning that kind of situation. Because I would say, Jesus, Allah, of course never said women should not become priests, but they also never said that women should become priests. So this is all about every problem about the religious interpretation of gender. So before I move on to my argument about the unexpected problem and harm this kind of policy can bring to the society, let me first move on to the rebuttals that I can make about the discussion. Sir, well, thank you. So, ladies and gentlemen, first of all, they're trying to characterize this situation through the two speakers. That somewhat religion is something that has a privilege that has been exempt from the government regulation. Ladies and gentlemen, the little religion contradicts that to you. The religion is not something that is exempt from the social regulations. Because if they would really exempt from the social regulations, then we will still kill the woman by stoning her, or we will hang her. It's just because he has to engage into adultery with the situations. now, ladies and gentlemen, about the second, about the check and balance. The third two speakers, they also talk about the check and balance. Why is no check and balance system for government should intervene into the job, ladies and gentlemen? So first of all, as I said, government has been doing their job about this social check and balance, with the banning the stoning woman, which things. And secondly, religion and society actually do. Ladies and gentlemen, in South America, where Catholic dominates, in those nations, there is a constant change of them accepting homosexual marriage. Ladies and gentlemen, social norms change, then there's of course the progressive and liberal, those priests, and they also try to change. We don't think, why do they have to make in the legislation, the law, to force them to change those religious who act upon their own belief and value, ladies and gentlemen. And now fourth, they also talk about the fundamental human right. The fundamental human rights should never be changed, ladies and gentlemen. Yes, fundamental human rights, of course, should never be changed. But the thing is that the word fundamental, ladies and gentlemen, fundamental human right is the right to live, right to survive, because it's not sharing right now here, because you have the right to live. Ladies and gentlemen, we think that, but the motion of equal opportunity takes too many things, ladies and gentlemen. Just because you can say equal, if you define equal opportunity as just fundamental human right, we don't think so in that way, because equal opportunity is so broad term. So we think if you say equal opportunity is a fundamental human right and you can intervene into by legislation, then you can just intervene to everything that religious people try to do. Yes.
You said that stoning was banned within the society. This also proves that religious police also can evolve. Why not the kind of equal opportunity that we provide within the status quo? Why does the religious institution have a reason not to do it? What are the harms?
Ladies and gentlemen, we think that religious evolve themselves because just like he has proved to us, stoning woman, even though there was such a typical crime act in the Sharia law, but now it is banned in the country. It is banned, and we think that this kind of religious also activists evolve and they do themselves. We think that the harm of forcing this religion to change itself outweighs this benefit. Now let me move on to my argument. So we think, ladies and gentlemen, think about the legislation. Think about the process that law is made. The process of law is made is very complicated and complex because it requires a social consensus. Because it requires everybody's agreement on certain values and certain beliefs in their generation. That's why we elect the congressman, and the congressman gather up again, and they vote for a legislation, and that legislation goes through a judicial review, and then it becomes a law. So, as I tell you, and as my legal opposition already characterized to you, legislation, law is something that's very important. So, because it's so important, it involves punishment. So, but we think, if you pass this policy and tries to punish other by just a very vague term, equal opportunity, we think it brings a legal instability. Because legal instability will be caused, because, ladies and gentlemen, in Korean Buddhism, women priests and men priests wear different clothes. And we think that's discrimination, that's punishment, ladies and gentlemen. Ladies and gentlemen, just because of such kind of equal opportunity, even they have never analyzed how the equal opportunity will be determined objectively, ladies and gentlemen. And our legal opposition has already told you there's no objective standard for how to actually go for this, ladies and gentlemen. Then, we think this subjectivity will anyhow intervene into this situation, and this will cause a legal instability. Because just because you have violated equal opportunity religion law, so now you come to the court and get the judgment. Ladies and gentlemen, so how will the judge will evaluate in the first place, even though legislation itself is not based on the objective rules, ladies and gentlemen? So we think this kind of situation brings the legal instability, which actually causes a lot of harms So we think this has to be done now. And about the wrong reflection, ladies and gentlemen, we think that institutions giving somebody a position or giving somebody a job to do is already decided by those institutions' own beliefs and value, ladies and gentlemen. We think that this kind of, if the government intervenes into this situation, and we think it gives a wrong reflection, because the policy they try to pass itself is in the first place based on subjectivity. Then we think that we keep people give a wrong message. That we think that wrong public message. The government itself, which has to be objectively evaluating other people's what other people do and and what other people think, it just subjectively intervenes without any kind of sort of objective standard of what kind of religious interpretation there should be. So we think the kind of institutional intervention into the institution happen. We think the kind of doing some wrong message that we should never follow. So what I told you today, ladies and gentlemen, legislation is something that's very important because it decides what is wrong and what is right. Then in this situation, that involves punishment. Then for punishing somebody in a democratic nation, you need to have an objective standard because it can cause some people, innocent people, wrongly punished. But because they haven't provided good standard for objectiveness, we think that this motion should fail because it causes legal instability. Thank you.
We thank the speaker for his speech. This closes the upper house debate. I now invite the member of government to open the lower house debate.
Madam Speaker, the opposition side's only justification to tell us why this religious belief is correct is because they assume that every single believer of that certain religion agrees with this kind of treatment between women and men. We think that this assumption has not been proven to be true. We think there are still people who have been blinded from equal treatment, the value or the perception of equal treatment between men and women, or who simply have been deprived of choices to actually access that opinion. We think they have not told us why these people are actually satisfied. Therefore, the justification, which was their case, does not stand. We think before the opening government side has told you basically why the government can impose this law, why we can maintain equality in terms of capacity, because government has power. By the closing side, we would like to tell you why fundamentally the government should be acting as a protector of these rights. And second of all, we would like to analyze more characters of people who are being oppressed under the status quo, who have not been able to maintain equalities. But before moving on to my extensions, let me make a few rebuttals to the previous speaker. First of all, the previous speaker talked about they talked about how it's very vague between if our concept of equality is very vague because it's different to see, it's really hard to see if something is equal or not. But we think it's very clear when women becomes able to become a priest because now she has maintained equality, because society has accepted her as having the same potential as men. We think that distinction is very clear. We are not going on very shaky things. And second of all, they have talked about how, yes, we think their legal instability justification is just fraud, as I have already told you in the introduction, because they have now told us why every single person is satisfied. So, having that rebutted, no thank you. Let me go into my extensions. First of all, why the government fundamentally should be the actor of protecting these rights. We think that the government's role is to assure equal opportunities or assure that citizens can maximize their happiness in their lives. And we think that opportunity is very important in this case. But fundamentally, because the citizens already contribute to society in terms of social contract, in many terms, for example, abiding certain laws or paying taxes, we think that at the same simultaneously, the government has a responsibility to give back to these citizens in terms of assuring certain rights. And the only way that citizens can actually maximize their happiness is when they have choices, when they have the maximum amount of choices. Because it depends on the individual what kind of choices would actually lead to a beneficial or good quality of life. And we think that it's not the government who should be choosing which choices are actually good for you, which choices are actually bad for you. So in today's case, the government is choosing, or the religion is actually choosing, that if you are a woman, you're going to provides an opportunity for these women or for these men to actually open up to the maximum amount of choices. We think just because you are born to be Christian, just because you are born to be Christian, and just because you are a woman, then under the status quo, what happens is that you can't live the choice, or you can't have the life of actually praying or being standing in front of the church, even though that might actually lead to a very, very happy life of yours. And the government is depriving these people of all these rights. Yes.
Considering the priest, the reason why Catholic and Christianity bans women or limits women from having to become a priest is because job characteristic of becoming a priest is to get the respect and the belief of the people which they believe that women will not be able to do so.
First of all, how can you say that everybody believes that right? And we think this kind of legislation will actually change the perceptions and provide opportunities to women that actually believe that that perception itself is wrong